China is now pushing the global tech envelope. A turning point was the launch of DeepSeek's R1 reasoning model in early 2025, a move that hardly anyone saw coming. Instead of fighting hardware constraints, China innovated around them. Now it's competing on efficiency and cost-effectiveness instead of just brute force. In the first chapter of our After DeepSeek podcast series, we introduced the power source behind China's innovation, a talent pipeline of skilled engineers and ambitious entrepreneurs.
China just has, one of the biggest talent pipelines in the world.
In the second chapter, we began to define the new reality of the global artificial intelligence race.
To be honest, low-bit training will be the future.
For all its domestic boom, China's tech journey remains complicated. It is a story unfolding under the shadow of international sanctions and economic anxieties at home. Beijing's strategy is now to secure independence and self-sufficiency in critical technologies. So, what does this environment mean for China's AI future? I'm your host, Xinmei Shen. I'm a tech reporter at the South China Morning Post.
And you are listening to the final episode of our After DeepSeek series. This is an AI-generated voice.
I'm very happy to begin our discussions with Tilly Zhang. She often speaks with tech engineers and executives on the ground in China. So, Tilly, first of all, we need to talk about DeepSeek, right? The launch of DeepSeek R1 changed the game pretty much for China tech, right? How would you describe what's been happening in China's AI space since then?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important thing from the DeepSeek event is that it really boosts the confidence, not only the confidence of developers, but also users. Different groups in China have a reason to believe that the local AI industry has a future.
Tilly Zhang works with Graphical Dragonomics, an independent research firm that specializes in coverage of China's economy, politics, and social issues. She is based in Beijing, and her reporting focuses on China's semiconductor, internet, and broader technology industry.
What DeepSeek proves is that Chinese AI can maybe find its own path of cost effectiveness. It's that not to only just compete on the capability, but also through how to build a good enough model through a very reasonable cost. The Chinese AI developers have a reason to believe that's also something they can be doing. Okay, we can also produce something similar with enough cost effectiveness and also to find our own space in the commercial market. So I think at that moment, Chinese AI is no longer just a policy child. It's not just the government saying okay, we want to develop better AI. It's the market believing, okay, we can really have better AI.
So this new focus on efficiency has shifted China's AI development from a policy goal to a much more market-driven reality?
Suddenly, users have this curiosity and maybe some a nationality proud of saying, oh, we have a great local AI now and we want to try it out. So the user acceptance for local AI had also improved. That's also a good news for the local AI developers.
To help unpack China's tech development in this after DeepSeek era, I also called up Ray Ma, who is based in Silicon Valley. Beyond her analysis, Ray provides first-hand insight by organizing tech tours to China.
Ray Ma is a leading China tech analyst and investor who provides data-driven insights into China's tech and startup ecosystem. And Ray also provides first-hand insights by organizing tech tours to China.
We run these curated, basically learning trips. We bring operators, investors, founders all together to see what's happening on the ground. We visit labs, industrial parks, and all sorts of companies.
What surprised you the most on your recent trips to deep tech in China?
I would actually say the number one surprise was the level of candor in the conversations. I did not expect people to be so forthcoming and so intellectually generous, and how they would be pretty open about the challenges that they were facing and their development plan. I just thought it was very refreshing. And then I also thought like the teams are pretty well-rounded. There's just like a much deeper entrepreneurial talent pool now. And then finally, one thing I think also that surprised me is just the level of sophistication of the government services now.
Ray's tech tours draw participants from places like South Africa, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Interestingly, Silicon Valley was previously a small recruitment source, but she's seeing that trend changing.
I would have to say DeepSeek really piqued the interest of a lot more Americans. So we have DeepSeek to thank for that. But I think what we really have to, thank DeepSeek for is that it made legible or visible to the rest of the world what a lot of many Chinese scientists and engineers have been working on for the past decade. So it's not really, something like new. It's like this capacity and talent bench that's been building up for quite a while, but DeepSeek sort of brought things to a boiling point so that people could see it.
The launch of DeepSeek R1 showed that China could innovate around hardware constraints, setting a new benchmark for AI reasoning. Where can we see the next major breakthroughs in China tech?
So for the next breakthroughs, I think everyone talks about it, but China has been doing tremendous strides in energy. I think that for AI, we will continue to see breakthroughs from China. We already see open source Chinese models doing all sorts of creative ways at optimization, exceeding benchmarks. But I think the next one, is pretty obvious. It's going to come from robotics. China is going to be one of the biggest end users of robots, especially in industrial use cases. So I fully expect to see breakthroughs on that front.
What other trends are you seeing within AI, within China's AI capabilities?
As far as we can see right now, right, because of the constraints on the Chinese AI development that are enforced by the semiconductor sanctions, for example, we're definitely seeing a lot more innovation on that front, right? Where you see the AI developers as well as the semiconductor manufacturers sort of coming together to build perhaps alternative pathways to intelligence, not super alternative that it's completely looking different. What I mean is going down, certain other forks, or I pretty much expect that to be what's going to happen, because you already see that in the Huawei announcement, for example, on how they're going a different route from NVIDIA due to the limitations that they face. And then by doing that, of course, the software layer is also going to change. And you see that in what DeepSeek and other players in China are releasing and have hinted at perhaps what the next, their next model versions might look like. You're going to see a lot more innovation around, what everyone has been calling edge processing, right? So things that are making devices intelligent versus, one giant supercomputer, giving more intelligence to everything you see around you.
The US strategy has been to constrain access to the best chips, forcing Chinese firms to innovate around a hardware bottleneck. How successful has that been for Chinese companies like Huawei?
So, for Huawei, they've had to deal with these sanctions for quite a few years now, and so have been building up alternative capacity, but they've had for a much longer time than that, a very flourishing chip design firm. And I think it's important to remember that, number one, not everyone needs the very, very top end chips. And then two, I think for the ones that do rely on the supply, we've heard all sorts of strategies, right? Some are extending, through clever engineering, extending the life of the current chips that they have. by a few years so that they can get more juice out of their existing inventory. Others are working on pretty aggressive optimization strategies. And that's really kind of what DeepSeek also did, right? So more creative ways, perhaps, and not, you don't have just, you don't have to submit to just the NVIDIA monopoly here. And in fact, there are other conflicting reports from people who run some government AI data centers in China where they actually say that they have chip capacity running idle.
So the constraints are real, but they have not stopped development. Instead, the pressure is forcing a new kind of engineering ingenuity. If we look at the biggest factors that could swing this global tech rivalry, there are chips, there are talent, but what are some important but often overlooked variables? You mentioned energy just now. Is that one of them? Or what are the others that you could be looking?
So I think there are two that I like to talk about a lot, and one of them is heavily in the US's favor, and one of them is, in China's favor currently, and that would be capital and energy. So capital markets, I think, just few people realize just how great the difference is between the depth of liquidity that you have in US capital markets versus Chinese ones. And that extends to both private and public company funding. And I think the access to capital that American companies have is just so much bigger. You see it very obviously in AI, but really across the entire stack. I think valuations for comparable companies doing very similar things oftentimes are a difference of 10x or even more. And that really affects how they can innovate, right? Because when you have a shorter pipeline, then you have to make decisions, and you may not be able to go after the most audacious or risky tech tree, for example, and that could have repercussions down the line.
Now let's turn to the other variable we mentioned, energy.
Energy is critical to AI development. A massive amount of power is required for the training and running of large AI models, powering high-performance computing chips and cooling data centers.
I think a specific report from Macquarie Investment Bank recently compared how much incremental power China and the US would need to add to support their respective AI ambitions. And the rough takeaway is that for China, given how much capacity it routinely adds, it would only need something like less than 5%, like 1 to 5% of the recent build rate to cover the next 5 years of AI related demand. But for the US, which has added power at a much slower pace, that number would be much, much higher. I think the number was up to 70%, depending on what your estimates are.
Coming back to what you said earlier, you're expecting more interest from the U.S. in China tech next year, which is still a little surprising given that the tensions between U.S. and China are still intensifying. How do you see the immediate and longer term implications of that on the AI race?
Oh, that's interesting that you said it's surprising. I would have thought it's not surprising given the quote unquote DeepSeek moment and people having more of a realization that China is actually innovating in this, quote unquote 0 to 1, right? Fundamental research, new technologies. The longer this, race, rivalry, whatever, Cold War, tech war, you want to call it, goes on, the more clear it will become which are, windows where you can collaborate where the quote unquote borders are more permeable versus where there are red lines, right? And you cannot work together at all. And there's going to be a lot of areas where at least there's a potential for learning. And that's what we're kind of focused on right now. So I think I would call this sort of like boundary testing. The boundaries are always changing.
Can you expand on that?
So for AI specifically, the US and China do tend to have slightly different goals. The Chinese side really sees AI as more of an assistive technology, and it's really highly focused on pushing out AI to as much of the economy as possible. The US is much more interested in having the most frontier AI lab, right? Because there's this belief that the first to get to a recursively improving super intelligence that's just going to be the dominant superpower. And I just think that the two countries have fundamentally different assumptions of how to develop AI. And that to me makes it almost seem like you have these two like really capable athletes that are kind of racing, but they're actually training for different competitions, right? Like one's training for a marathon, the other one's training for like a decathlon or something. So they're just like training for kind of adjacent but different competitive sports. And then they have different ideas of what it means to win. And obviously the best result is that both become better, right? Like the R&D and the scientific advances in both ecosystems really flourish. But obviously the downside could be that there's a lot of duplicated effort where collaboration would have, made the collective humanity advance much faster. I don't think that there's going to be like one winner. And I think that as it's going right now, Chinese players are going to be better positioned and are probably more interested in servicing the rest of the world. And, the US players are going to be able to do really well just focusing on the developed world, especially with the strength of the really strong and deep capital markets and the focus, like I said, on frontier AI versus industrial diffusion.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much for your insights. Let's return to Tilly Zhang. Tilly, you noted that China is leveraging a cost-effective path with its models like DeepSeek, while the US has focused on more expensive AI. Is this cost-effective approach now China's core competitive advantage?
So the question I got asked a lot in the past have always been like, oh, how big is the gap between Chinese AI and the US AI, and when can they catch up? But I think what's proved after DeepSeek is that Chinese AI can find its own way of building cost-effective models, which is not something the US has been very enthusiastic at doing, because what they have been doing is more of the closed source models, which has been charging users more, and the enterprise clients also a bit much more expensive than the Chinese AI. But what Chinese AI can do is that we provide good enough models that maybe not really compete with the leaders in terms of top capability, but we can lower our cost and also your cost. So in the end, we can apply our solutions more broadly because it can find a space on the market. The confidence is a very important factor. Developers are more committed to the future models developments, like Alibaba, Baidu, or Tencent, ByteDance have been all like allocating big budget for their model development this year.
Tilly, how close is China to achieving true self-sufficiency in chip technology?
I don't think any country in this world can be 100% self-sufficient. That shouldn't be a goal. Nobody should producing everything by itself. It's not that Chinese companies can't get US supplies anymore, but that like it got excluded from the international supply chain. It's not just you can't buy from Nvidia, but also that you can't like buy equipment from Netherlands, from Japan, or other materials from like international companies. The self-sufficiency rate, I would think in the past a couple of years had improved to a certain degree that China is able to make more things that it wasn't able to make before, like was proved by the Huawei 7 nanometer chip. That chip was approved that even that China is under export control, it can still self-supply some of the necessary advanced chips. So yes, the self-sufficiency rate now on chips, I did an estimation in them. That's probably somewhere between 30 to 50%, depends on specific use case.
You said in a recent article that China's next 5-year plan will involve important changes in strategy. Could you tell us about the 5-year plan and what are some of the most important changes for tech in the coming years?
Yes. We know that China values tech development a lot, and in the past, it's mostly about national security. But the two major changes I saw from the next 5-year plan are that first is commercialization. They set a new tone that tech development is not only for national security. This time, tech development is also for the economy. They want to create more commercially successful tech industries like what they did on EV and solar. So figuring out what are the market wants is the next stage for the Chinese tech development. And the second big change is another thing I've been emphasizing this year is the increasing centralization. Because centralization here means like more control by the central government rather than the local ones. I'm actually seeing the central government is ready to take a bigger role on the market, not just by like giving a general rough guideline, but also to give a like more overall coordination on the market in order to avoid the mistake being made like local governments usually work for themselves instead of for the national market. They in the end might be over investing into redundant sectors rather than like considering the actual market situation.
The After DeepSeek era has clarified the new dynamics of the global AI race. It's an equation defined by China's profound resilience against technological constraints. The nation's trajectory is a road towards self-sufficiency, fueled not just by efficient algorithms and state policies, but by an engine of ambitious, diligent engineers. As both Rui Ma and Tilly Zhang have explained, this path has led to a fundamental divergence in strategic goals between China and the US. It's no longer a question of one side catching up, but of two fundamentally different AI markets taking shape. And Tilly believes ultimately the demand will decide.
I do think like people would choose what suit them the best regardless who produced it, right? Like people naturally would just choose their best options instead of considering too much of like where did it came from. When you want a cheap but good enough model, you probably should go to the ones made by China. But if you want a high capability one, you probably should go to the US ones.
The long-term advantage, as we heard, will be determined not just by algorithms and chips, but by structural factors. The US maintains a significant lead in capital markets, but China holds a critical edge in energy capacity, the very resource that will power the next generation of AI. The story of AI after DeepSeek is the story of a world where technological standards and supply chains are increasingly splitting, creating both new technological challenges and opportunities for China, the US, and the rest of the world. That brings me to the end of our three-part series After DeepSeek. From the South China Morning Post, thank you for listening.
Please visit our website to read more about China's tech revolution. It is scmp.com. And if you missed the first 2 episodes of our After DeepSeek series, find them wherever you get your podcasts. After DeepSeek was written and produced by Claudia Hinterseer. Our hosts were the Post's tech editor Zhou Xin and reporters Coco Feng and Xinmei Shen. Sound design and editing was by Bonnie Au. Copy editing by Joe Kainz. Postcasts are supervised by Chu Lu.